Well, TRT World's Asha Tanner joins us live from Westminster in London. Asha?
Natasha, there is a real sense of disbelief in the corridors of Westminster behind me and also around the world as Britons on Friday voted to Brexit. No country has ever left the EU before, and we are in uncharted waters here in the UK. Now, for David Cameron, the reason why the referendum was held was because he said to the United Kingdom if he was to win the general election, an EU referendum would be held. That promise was kept, and now on Friday he has also offered the nation his resignation. He intends to step down, and in the autumn a new leader will take the Conservative Party forward, and there will be a new Prime Minister to help extract the UK from the European Union. Now, Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, has made a comment today saying that the decision to Brexit is a historic moment, but not a moment for hysterical reactions, and that is key. What happens now? There is a huge amount of uncertainty. Nobody knows, but everyone is watching the markets and everyone is watching the European leaders and what their reaction will be. Now, David Cameron, who is going to fill his role? That is the next big question for the United Kingdom. There are two plausible candidates, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, and of course, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, another Conservative, and also the former London Mayor. He has not made a comment so far following the victory of the Leave campaign. We are expected to hear from him any time soon. Now, with regards to David Cameron's resignation and the latest reactions, let's bring in Myriam Francois. Myriam, what's been the reaction from David Cameron stepping down? This referendum was his choice after all.
Yeah, and absolutely. And when he gave his speech outside Downing Street, it now appears that Brexit will be the defining aspect of his legacy. What's interesting about that, of course, is that it probably was never intended to be. Many people regarded that pledge back in 2013 as very much a political gamble. The British public wasn't clamouring for a referendum on this issue, but in fact it was seen as very much an attempt by Cameron at the time to placate back some of his backbenchers and indeed some of the voices on the right coming from UKIP specifically on this issue. What has actually emerged is that ultimately this may be what Cameron will be remembered by. So he'll be remembered by a decision that he didn't ultimately end up, he didn't think was going to be the defining part of his commitment, but has ended up being exactly that.
There is some irony this morning, isn't there, that when we look at the margin, it is so small. There was just 52% who voted to leave and 48% that wanted to remain. And the reason behind that, one of those issues that the Leave campaign was pushing was sovereignty. And of course, on Friday, the UK has woken up as a divided nation.
Yeah, it's woken up a divided nation, and the future of that sovereignty and what that looks like is absolutely not clear. As you mentioned, we're in uncharted territory. No nation has ever left the EU before, and how the UK will now renegotiate its relationship with the EU is still left open. We don't know what that's going to look like in all spheres. And in fact, when it comes to legislation, a lot of the legislation that had been coming from Brussels will now have to be devised in Westminster. I saw one person commenting that we would have to have 25 announcements in each Queen's speech to bring forward the amount of legislation that we need to keep up with what we had from Brussels. But of course, it's also trade agreements. I mean, there's some serious trade agreements that are going to have to be negotiated by the UK, and it's starting, as if you like, from fresh. Now, the Leave campaign see that as a positive thing. They'll argue that this is a good thing for Britain, that it'll allow them, the country, to define itself on its own terms and not terms defined by external powers. But of course, the outcome is what will define whether or not it'll be a positive thing for the UK ultimately.
Well, let's look at some of the issues and remind people of how the Leave campaign managed to secure that victory. And the Leave campaign were pushing the two issues. We mentioned sovereignty already. The other big one was immigration.
Absolutely.
Just remind us how many immigrants are currently within the UK and their strategy for what they say is bringing down immigration.
Well, so one of the other points that David Cameron had pledged was that he would bring down immigration. And in fact, the figure that was floated was that 100,000. Net migration to the UK in 2015 was over 330,000, and over half of that was from within the EU itself. And so, of course, many of his critics pointed out that he made a pledge which he could never keep to, because, of course, the free movement of people within the EU means that he would never have been able to ensure that that figure remained under 100,000. And so, yes, immigration has been one of the big issues for the Leave campaign. And now that the UK has decided to leave the EU, how it negotiates immigration is going to be one of the critical issues. A lot of discussion has happened over the point system, similar to that in Australia, and bringing over skilled workers to fill specific positions, rather than what I think has been a lot of the popular concern, which is a sort of unfiltered immigration.